Hello, I'm John Sandbakken, Executive Director of the National Sunflower Association. Today I'm going to give you a sunflower industry outlook. The discussion topics I'm going to talk about are NSA research, crop protection, acreage and yield trends, and current product trends. Let's start out with research. Five key areas of research that NSA works on are disease, insects, production issues, weed control, and product utilization. The funding that we've done for North Dakota-based projects here in 2021 on the disease side, we're working on phomopsis. We're looking at both using fungicides to try to manage phomopsis stem canker, and then also genetic resistance, which is very important. You can never rely on one source to control any disease. So we're also working on downy mildew. There's some very good seed treatments out there right now, but we also want to make sure that we keep downy mildew in check. So that we need to find something new, we need to be working on that also, and so we're checking on the virulence of that. Continue to work on rust, especially resistance in confection sunflower, and we're trying to do that through genetic means and stacking that with downy mildew genes. Also investigating the impact that disease has on factors as far as yield. Just something that we would like to get a better handle on how disease does impact yield. Also, we continue to work on sclerotinia. We're working both on marker-assisted breeding for head rot and basal stalk rot to enhance resistance. Also, we found out through our research that plants that have oxalic acid are more tolerant to stalk rot, especially for sclerotinia basal stalk rot. And so what we're trying to do is find varieties that we can identify that and incorporate that into germplasm. Also, we're also working on how does the soil interact and the bacteria and sclerotinia, and how do those two coexist within and infect the plant. And so we're trying to get also a handle on that and also work on that area. On the insect side of things, we continue to evaluate new insecticides for wireworm control. We're also looking at distribution of red sunflower seed weevil populations. Especially, we want to make sure that we don't have any resistance to pyrethroid class insecticides. Currently in North Dakota, the research that Dan Canodal from NDSU has done, she's not found that there's any kind of resistance to pyrethroids in red sunflower seed weevil. However, we just want to get a good benchmark and see where we're at. Something else with red sunflower seed weevil, we're looking to look at how does insect biology and the cultural practices, is there certain things we can do as far as management, as far as planting dates or plant spacings, plant stands, things like that. What is it that we can also do besides using chemical to take care of this insect? On the production side and weed control, we continue to look at ways that how we can integrate cover crops and how herbicides work to control glyphosate-resistant weeds. We're also looking at assessing the importance of plant spacing. I mean, how do skips, doubles, gaps, how do they affect yield? And is there something with seed emergence in these field conditions? Also, with the move in our industry more toward high oleic, what consumers want is they want oil that is higher in monounsaturates, so higher oleic levels, and also they want less saturated fat acids. So we're also looking at that. And something that we're also working on the blackbird side, which I wish I could say that we had control of, but we continue to do research, is how can we use drones in spraying repellent on blackbirds? Currently, you can spray repellent on the plants, but you can't necessarily spray it on the birds. And so we're trying to see what we can do with that. On product utilization, we're looking for ways that if there's any kind of micronutrients or different ways you can feed sunflower seed, trying to find more uses for that. And obviously, the more uses you have for those byproducts or for the seed itself, that'll translate into higher seed prices for you as a producer. Now let's talk about crop protection. For crop protection, NSA participates in various residue trials to accelerate the registration process. We do this because, as you know, sunflower being a smaller crop, we're usually not that first crop that's going to be on that first flush on the label. And so what we want to do is encourage companies to add sunflower to the label. And so we participate in residue trials. We continue to carry out meetings with the pesticide companies to determine possible new labels. Anytime I see something out there that might work in sunflower, I'm going to be on the phone or send an email to that company seeing if we can get it registered for sunflower. We also work with EPA to try to streamline the registration process. It can be very slow at times. And then, something that's just really critical is working with university personnel to determine efficacy of these new products and make sure that they do work on sunflower. Something that we're currently working on is with BASF on brofenilide. This is Torexa. This is a seed treatment for wireworm control, and it was available for small grains in 2021. We're trying to get this labeled for sunflower. The thing about Terexa that works really well is that it actually kills the wireworms. And that's something that we've not had for a long time. We've been using Cruiser, which repels them, but that does not kill them. Something else that we're doing with the Carrington and Langdon Research Extension Centers is on using a fungal biological control agent. This is to try to control head rot. They've been doing research on this where bees get a powder, a biological powder on their little legs. They go out and when they pollinate the plants, they're basically putting that product onto the head of the sunflower. And what they're finding is that it is reducing the amount of head rot that happens with this. So something that we're going to continue to work on and possibly another method to control head rot. And also for crop protection, NSA is involved with various working groups to try to keep the chemicals that you have available to you. One of the first groups that we're part of is the pyrethroid group. As you know, all chemicals go through a review process at EPA about every 10 to 15 years. For the most part, pyrethroids have come out okay in the risk review process. The one exception is their impact on aquatic invertebrates. And this deals with vegetative filter strips. Currently, labels have about a 10-foot VFS. EPA in our initial discussions with them as our group, they wanted a 66-foot VFS. Right now, I believe that we're more so in an area where this will be reduced from about 25 feet to 15 feet if you use a no-till process in your land, or you use strip tilling or mulch till, but all other areas will be about 25. It's not the 10 feet that we have now, but it's sure a heck of a lot better than that 66 feet that EPA wants. And pyrethroids are currently in the registration review process, and they're moving into the Endangered Species Act review right now. For paraquat, we're also involved in that group. At one point, EPA was not going to allow spraying on sunflower, especially as a desiccant. And so what we have come up with is EPA has projected that they're going to allow pilots to spray 350 acres a day. And this would not necessarily be for the whole airplane, but it would be for each individual pilot. And it's one of the things that I guess once again, it's better than not allowing it to be sprayed at all. We would have hoped for more, but hopefully this will be able to work in the interim. We're also part of the neonicotinoid working group. This is your Cruiser seed treatment, where they're reevaluating the whole neonicotinoid family of pesticides. And their big issue with neonics is the protection of bees and other pollinators from pesticide exposure. And right now, this is also in the Endangered Species Review Act. This will take place in June of 2022 when it starts. From my discussions with EPA, seed treatments like Cruiser are not a concern at this time, but it's something that we want to make sure that we stay on top of this issue, because obviously if we don't have Cruiser, we don't have a viable seed treatment for sunflower, and so it's very important to us and to you as producers. Next, let's talk about acreage and yield trends. When you look at planted acres for sunflower, basically since about 2008, we've stayed fairly consistent. We have up years, some down years, but overall, acreage has stayed somewhat stable across the U.S. as far as planted oil type acres. Confection acres, kind of the same story, and that is actually they've decreased in the last few years. And when you first look at these numbers, you think, my God, wow, confection has really dropped. But the thing to consider here is that the confection industry is more focused now on in-shell production versus kernel production, because most of the kernel production now is either obtained through con oils or through oil types. So even though the acres are reduced for confections, it's not that there's less demand for the product, but it's more so focused on that in-shell. When you look at oil type varieties, when you look at where we were at in 2002 versus where we were at in 2020, or my estimate for 2021, yields on oil types, it was really nice trend lines, really moving up very nicely. We've gone from about 1,200 pound national average to up, we set a record in 2020 at 1,800 pounds. And this year in 2021, obviously when the drought impacted things, this is not an official number, but my ballpark guess of about 1,600 pounds. USDA will be releasing their official yields in the January report, which will be coming out in mid-January. But I think overall the drought impacted oil type sunflowers to some extent, but not to the degree that it did to some other crops. When you look at oil type yields here in North Dakota and you compare it to the national average, you'll notice that in most years, North Dakota has exceeded that national average. And so when you see that that's everything from an area that was, extreme drought in Texas, Colorado, to areas where you had higher production that could have been irrigated production. So when you look at this, North Dakota has done very well on oil type yield. Confection also very nice steep yield trend for them. Same thing there. I mean, if you look back at 2004, we were averaging 1,000 pounds, and now we're closer to about 1,800 pounds. So actually, confections have really bumped up their yields over the past few years, and is just really something to consider. Is when you look at confection varieties, is that the trend continues to move up, and just in a very positive direction. Also, North Dakota overall has, in the last few years, especially the last three, has exceeded the national average on confections. And as I mentioned, this is taking into account irrigated acres. So basically in North Dakota, everything is dry land. And so that's just one of those things where it's even in a better position. When you look at the total supply for oil types, what the thing is, you want to be growing a crop that's not going to have a lot of carryover. And when you look at this, um, we went through a lot of crop here in the last market year, 2021, but stocks did not build to a great extent. And when you look at the crop that we're going to have coming in this year, my initial estimate is that we'll have even less stocks. So that really puts us in a good position for 2022 to contract acres and to add more acres, because the thing is, the market is demanding more acres. And if you notice, just for the last 5 years, stocks have been very low, and that's just a good trend that the industry is using the product and it's moving along very nicely. When you look at confections, same thing. We're really not building a lot of stocks. Whatever we're producing, we're using, either whether it be in the domestic market or in the export market. And obviously, you want to grow a crop that's not going to have a lot of carryover, because it's going to give you consistent pricing every single year. And that's been the case here for all the sunflower types. Let's talk about some of the current product trends. When you look at confections, as I had mentioned, confections overall have higher, the acreage has been down somewhat, but some of that is due to, when you look at these numbers, the trend is slightly down, but a lot of this is related to COVID. When people could not get out, they couldn't do outdoor things, we couldn't gather, and that's when a lot of the confection seeds are consumed. And when you look at these numbers, it looks like it could be on the downside, but I do believe that with COVID getting more under control, more people getting vaccinated, that these numbers will rise up to historical levels this year, especially as we move more into normal situation. The trends on the confection side of the market, the domestic and the export are distinctly different markets. They require different products. Exports are really focused on large seeds with a long type. So, for example, if you go to most countries, they eat the seeds one at a time, and here we throw a whole bunch in our mouth. And so it's a little bit different. So they really need that larger seed. Hybrids are changing. Yields are going up to meet this demand also. And the goal is to produce hybrids that are 75% over a 20 screen. And this is obviously to fulfill that market both on the export side and on the domestic side. And when you look at it, expect demand to increase at the same rate for both markets, for both exports and for domestic. But in shell, overall, is going to probably see a larger volume increase than kernel over the next 7 years, as more people look for healthier products, and sunflower fits in very well with that. When you look at bird food usage, the last, if you, other than this previous market year, this past one, bird food was probably pretty consistent. But if you notice, I mean, we had just unbelievable numbers, and a lot of this is the COVID effect. People were stuck at home, they couldn't do things, they couldn't get out, and so we just had a surge in people feeding birds. It was just something to do, something to pass the time, and so this past market year, we had just a huge surge. And now I'm not certain if this will be a long-term trend or not, but obviously we'll find out in the next market year ahead. But we got a lot of people back feeding birds, and that's very good for competition for the crushers to make sure their prices are also fair. When you look at sunflower oil usage, we've had just a very nice growth trend. I mean, when you look back to 2013-14 to where we are today, we've added over 100,000 metric tons, to the amount of sunflower oil that is used here. So just a really nice growth trend. And as a producer, once again, when you see things like this, what you want is you want to have a market that's going to grow gradually. You don't want severe upward movement or downward. And so this has just been a nice, steady building trend, and we continue to see this to probably grow in the future. When you look at where sunflower oil usage has gone, we've been increasing about 5 or 10% per year, and the trend, given a lot of the new products that are out there, it looks like that's going to continue in the years ahead. So when you look at the sunflower oil market, and for those of you who have grown sunflower in the past or remember in the older days, We used to export about 80% of our product, but when you saw that nice trend, the reason for that is that we're consuming that oil domestically. The seed prices were mainly based on soy oil back in the old days before Newsun, and now it's more related to other competing oils like cotton or corn, and we would crush the crop basically in 6 months. And now, when we're more of a domestic market, we've got to have that supply over 12 months. It's got to be every single month that we have seed available. Storage also was mainly at the plants in the old days, and now it's more on farm and very little pre-harvest pricing. And now you've got more pre-harvest pricing. We're offering cash or act of God contracts, which were just not the case. And something that we had in the past before Newsland was inconsistent production, and that made it difficult to be in the domestic market. And now we just want to be in an area where we can offer to meet that consumer demand annually. And right now, obviously, it's been this way for the last few years. Very intense competition for acres, and I don't foresee that changing in the future. I think we're always going to be in that situation, but we're going to have less volatility because we're going to have that more focus on the domestic market, where in the past we had a lot of price volatility because we were competing more so on the export market with the Argentines and the Russians and the Ukrainians, and now that's not the case. We're basically exporting the product to Canada and also consuming it domestically. And it used to be the goal was to be good returns to the grower, but now we know that the industry knows that they've got to be among the best returns in order to get those acres. So I just want to just kind of walk through 2022 new crop prices. These prices, as I'm recording this in mid-December, this is where we were at on the Newsun on the cash side at 27 to 27.30. You can see with the Act of God contract is at 26.50, 26.80. High Lakes at our slight premium to Newsun, about a 50-cent premium. And something to remember is that sunflower is the only oilseed that pays premium for oil content above 40% at a rate of 2% premium for each 1% above 40. So let's say you have a 45% oil content. Well, that'll increase your gross return about 10% higher per hundredweight. And when you look at that AOG 26.50 contract, that increases over $29. And if you look at the cash high Oleic contract at 27.55, that will move you up over $30. So, very good return. I think new crop prices right now at the crush plants are very attractive for oil type sunflowers right now. And I think that this is a trend that's going to continue, especially since we had fewer acres in 2021, probably less production. And so the market's going to be very aggressive to get those acres. And I don't have confection prices as far as for new crop right now, but I know that several of the companies are out with contracts. And the thing is with confections now, there are so many different varieties that are out there that they have various contracts. And so to have one price listed or two prices is impossible. But I would encourage you to get a hold of the confection companies to see what they're offering. Something to keep track of, as you watch the markets and as you make your decisions for what you're going to put into your rotation, here are some things that you really got to watch. And outside markets have just been a huge influence on how things have gone in commodities the last few years. Watch what's happening with crude petroleum oil, what's happening on the stock exchange, etc. South American weather is going to be something to really watch. It looks right now that they're going to be producing a record large crop of oilseed in South America, and that could affect especially soybean prices here in the U.S. But we're also in a La Nina, and so honestly, who knows how things are going to turn out. Something else to watch, obviously, China. They're that 800-pound gorilla as far as demand, and you've got to watch and see what China is going to be doing. They have reduced their purchases here the last few months, and that's a little bit concerning for the U.S. market because we have our certain window of opportunity to export to China, and then South America takes over, and their supply is going to be available here in the first part of February. And it's going to be something to really watch to see how much U.S. product moves to China, and that will influence definitely new crop values and old crop in the near term. Also, something that's always so important is obviously the value of the dollar versus major currencies. Obviously, most transactions in the world are done in U.S. dollars. And so if the dollar is stronger, that's going to make it a little bit tougher to compete on the export side. And obviously, this is going to be another year where the competition for acres is going to be just very intense. And the thing is, drought-reduced crops in a lot of cases are going to bid for acres like sunflower is going to. And, it's going to be something to keep track of. I mean, there's going to be some good opportunities to lock in some things. And how is that going to affect U.S. soybean production? Because obviously the largest produced oilseed in the U.S. Is definitely going to have something that is going to affect all oilseeds to some extent. And the other thing to kind of watch, and this is something that's going to be a longer term trend, is what biofuel and renewable diesel does. It's just been the biggest push to really boost yields, uh, boost oil prices that I've seen in years. And it's something that you as a producer, you want to keep track of, because in the end, I mean, it's going to be a real fight between food and fuel usage, and we need more oil. And so for a high oil bearing crop like sunflower, that's just very positive news, and I think bodes well for us in the long term. Something else I just want to mention, as a producer, you are able to get our publication, the Sunflower Magazine, free of charge. We have 6 issues per year. There's various production and market stories, and you can sign up for that on the NSA website, which I'm going to put up next. Our website is at www.sunflowernsa.com. On our website, you can get daily prices, yield trials, you can find out labeled pesticides. We have our weekly news, supply and demand tables, basically your number one source for finding anything out about sunflower. And it's just something that is always available there. We update the markets every single day that they're traded, and just something as a producer that's a really good resource for you. So I thank you for listening to my presentation, and I hope you add sunflower to your rotation in 2022.